blowhards, both of you! She was probably some smoked-colored camp girl, like that one's mother.
My mother was a pure woman from a noble family. And I, at least, know who my father is. You pig-eating son of a whore.
Where did you learn our language?
I listened.
Here, you will need this sword.
I cannot lift this.
Grow stronger.
Welcome to Couch Potato Theater here on the Fandom Podcast Network. Couch Potato Theater is the show here on the Fandom Podcast Network that covers those cult classics or those movies you just absolutely love. You might own the Blu-ray 10 times over, have the Criterion Special Edition, or just have the old VHS tape if it's old enough. But you know what? It doesn't matter, because as soon as you see it on television, you stop and you watch that show. And that is what Couch Potato Theater is all about. Those movies you cannot let go and turn away from. I'm Kyle, your host for this edition of Couch Potato Theater. We here at the Fandom Podcast Network are proud to celebrate this edition of Couch Potato Theater, The 13th Warrior from 1999. But as always, I cannot take on the Eaters of the Dead alone. So I am joined first and foremost by my co-founder here at the Fandom Podcast Network, my co-host for Culture Clash, and of course the host of Blood of Kings, a Highlander podcast here on the Fandom Podcast Network, Mr. Kevin Reitzel, or do we call you Happy?
Not just yet, but yeah, I'm excited for this one, man. There's this has an interesting history, and I don't think we could do a show about the Northmen and the Vikings unless we have the Viking of the Fandom Podcast Network.
Yeah, of course. And that means we have our own Bulvi himself, the co-host of Blood of Kings, Mr. Lee Fillingsness. Lee, it's time to... You are the true Viking of the Fandom Podcast Network.
Tusen takk for det. Jeg kommer fra Bergen, og jeg har lært van jij. Sorry. Nobody was listening long enough to learn my language. Thank you. This has always been kind of one of my favorite movies. As a person of verifiable Viking descent and multilingual, this movie has always just been a lot of fun for me. Even knowing how bad some of it is, I just cannot get over how much I enjoy this movie, and rewatching it, it was like seeing an old friend.
Yeah, no, this movie is one of the more interesting histories in Hollywood. We're going to get to all that. But first, Kevin, would you care to tell everybody where they can find not only Couch Potato Theater, but all the great shows of the Fandom Podcast Network?
Of course, you can find this show, Couch Potato Theater, and as Kyle mentioned, all of our other great shows under the Fandom Podcast Network umbrella, or tent, as you may call it, at fpnet.podbean.com. The Fandom Podcast Network is also on the Podbean app. You can also find the Fandom Podcast Network on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Podbean, Google Play, Spotify, iHeartRadio, iTunes, and please head on over to Facebook and search for Fandom Podcast Network. Check out everything there and give us a like. You can also email us at fandompodcastnetwork@gmail.com. We are also on Instagram and Twitter under Fandom Podcast Network. My name is Kevin. I am on Twitter and Instagram as well at Spartan_Phoenix. Kyle, where can we find you?
You can find me floating around on Twitter at AKyleW, or fighting the cavemen or whatever other things Northmen fight on Instagram at AKyleFandom. Lee, where can people find you on social media?
Digging in the dirt like a dog. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at The Way of the Way. I've got a couple Facebook pages up there as well. And I'm just a guy. Feel free to send me a message on the Facebooks and the interwebs.
Lee, you got some scratches on your face there. Do you want some of this cow urine here? It might help heal that up a little bit.
Keep that filth off of my face.
There are two ways you can support the Fandom Podcast Network and Couch Potato Theater. Please head on over to Apple Podcast or iTunes, and we would love a rated review. Just search Fandom Podcast Network. And if you like what you're hearing here on Couch Potato Theater, please leave us a 5-star review, but we would love feedback in general. Also, we have a TeePublic store. That is a great way to support the Fandom Podcast Network and Couch Potato Theater, where you can get your own Couch Potato Theater t-shirt and other apparel. Please visit Couch Potato Theater store on TeePublic. Search Fandom Podcast Network or Couch Potato Theater. Over to you, Kyle.
Now, Lee, remember after this podcast, when the pus starts to run and you get a fever, I'm just saying.
Given the way things are, it was going to happen anyways.
Well, again, as we dive into this episode of Couch Potato Theater, we are covering the 13th Warrior, the Antonio Banderas film from 1999. Let's give you this is an interesting movie in Hollywood history. We got a lot of things to talk about, but The 13th Warrior is a 1999 American historical fiction action film based on Michael Crichton's novel Eaters of the Dead, which is a loose retelling of the tale of Beowulf combined with Ahmad ibn Fadlan's historical account of the Volga Vikings. It stars Antonio Banderas as Ahmad ibn Fadlan, as well as Diane Venora. Sorry. Yeah, and Omar, the legendary Omar Sharif. It was directed by John McTiernan. Crichton actually directed some of the reshoots. The film was produced by McTiernan, Crichton, and Ned Dowd with Andrew G. Vajna, James Biggam, and Ethan Dubrow as executive producers. Now, let's get into a little bit of the plot here, because this is where things get... This is an interesting story, but... The plot of The 13th Warrior is as follows. A cultured diplomat joins a band of savage warriors in a time to meet an even more fearsome enemy in the historical adventure. In 922 AD, Ibn Fadlan, Antonio Banderas is a Muslim emissary from Baghdad en route to meet with the king of Saklaba when he is captured by a gang of Vikings. While Ibn and his people are intelligent and well-mannered, the Vikings are a rowdy and sometimes unpleasant lot with an unquenchable appetite for food, alcohol, and women. However, in time, he develops an understanding and respect for the Viking warriors and is welcomed into their society by their leader, Bolwai. However, Ibn must now join them as they return to their homeland once they receive word of an invasion by a huge pack of bloodthirsty invaders who will destroy anything in their path, including the flesh of the men they have killed. We've got a couple great posters, I think, for this film. I love both of them. The first one is kind of more of the original poster with Antonio Banderas on the side of the cover, kind of in half silhouette. You see some of the cavemen, Eaters of the Dead, riding on horses. You see a shot of the sword Antonio Banderas uses with the 13th Warrior, an ordinary man and an extraordinary journey. You also have a secondary poster, which is a great shot of the ship the Northmen use, as you see just the eye of the Antonio Banderas in this silhouetted into the sun here. Now, Kevin, what did you think of these movie posters, and which one stood out for you?
The first one you spoke of is the more iconic one, and that actually is the one I've always remembered, with Antonio Banderas and his newly shaped sword, and then the 13th Warrior warrior spelled out with the O. O is in that little cross inside the O, with the tagline saying "An ordinary man and extraordinary journey." The one below actually is new to me. I don't remember that. Searching on Google for these posters and stuff, that popped up, and I don't ever remember seeing that because it was never in the theater poster that I remember, and it was never in the video releases that I remember.
Yeah. What about you, Lee? Which one of these posters stands out to you?
Well, I mean, kind of same as Kevin. That first one really is the iconic. It gives you a good sense of what you're about to see. If you're looking at the other one, you're going to think that this is a sailing adventure. And really, they spend a couple minutes on the boat, and then the rest of the time is on land. But this poster was actually the cover. I had read the book originally. It was, the original book, Eaters of the Dead. I was on a big Crichton kick like everybody was in the 90s. And it's like, oh, Crichton with Vikings, definitely want to read this. But when they re-released it as the 13th Warrior, this was the cover of the book. So I remember seeing that. And I think the other poster is better. This one just doesn't really let you know what you're in for. It looks like the poster for Dead Calm, to be honest.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, it does.
Kevin, you want to help me out with some movie taglines?
Oh, of course. Well, we've got Fear Reigns, which is at the bottom of that second poster. The one I mentioned earlier, An Ordinary Man, An Extraordinary Journey, and Pray for the Living. And that's Prey.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. Now, here's where things get interesting with the 13th Warrior before we talk about everybody's first experience seeing it. The 13th Warrior is considered one of the biggest bombs in Hollywood history. You would think you've got Michael Crichton, who was red hot with anything he touched as far as his properties. Antonio Banderas was scorching hot at this point in popularity and on the rise big time. And this movie just had some issues. It had some things, and it is gone down in history as one of the biggest bombs ever in Hollywood. Kevin, I know you got something to interject here.
Yeah, I found this article, and there's one paragraph in this article I think kind of sums it up. It says, Eaters of the Dead, because that's what it was originally going to be called, was shot in the summer of 1997 with Antonio Banderas as Eben. A release date was set for the spring of 98, but then moved to the summer of the potential blockbuster. Teaser trailers were released. Then came the early test screenings, and the result of which McTiernan's exit and costly, extensive reshoots directed by Crichton himself. Retitled The 13th Warrior and still credited to McTiernan, the movie finally made it to theaters in late summer of 1999, so almost 2 years later after it was shot. There's no consensus on how much it cost, though some estimate that the studio lost as much as $130 million on the project, about $185 million in today's dollar.
Yeah, a little painful for the studio, and yeah, it was a mess. I want to ask both of you guys, because obviously McTiernan stepped away because of just some really bad test screenings and everything like that. But it was Michael Crichton himself that took over on the reshoots. Do you think maybe Crichton's ego at this point kind of got in his own way? Kevin, what do you think?
I don't know about that. I know he has an ego. So does John McTiernan. But from what I've heard about this, and you do have to listen to test screen audiences, because, a lot of our favorite movies would have had different endings if it weren't for test screen audiences. And in most of these cases, when you're showing these to test screen audiences, they want to tell you what they want to see. And if they're disappointed in something, like the only test screen audience I've ever been to was the 12 Monkeys. And I was harsh on that thing when I was given the questionnaire. I did not care for that. I didn't like the ending, the original ending on that thing. And so I can only assume that Crichton was listening to this, because I'm sure this was a very important project to him, because, he was one of obviously the writers and the producers. And I mean, you could look at it his ego, but I think he wanted to save this film too, to be honest. I mean, that's just my opinion. And from what I've heard some speculation about that. I don't know. What do you think, Lee?
Well, with this one, I think Crichton knew the story he wanted to tell. And if, with you get any director, they're reading the script their way. And then Crichton had the story that worked in his head. And McTiernan has changed a lot of plots. Die Hard kind of changed quite a bit from the original novel to what ended up being written, or what ended up being filmed. But I think the pedigree that Crichton had as a storyteller at this point trumped kind of the success of Die Hard. And I think it was probably the right choice. And I think that, how long Crichton had been involved in cinema, because he goes back to what was it, Omega Man or something in the 70s and 80s. So he'd been around. He knows what needs to be done, and kind of watching it again, you can sort of see angles that look modern and make it look like you're in a modern world and not in a medieval world. There's something about the way that a few of the scenes were shot that didn't. It just didn't make me feel like I was looking at Vikings anymore. So
is that a good thing or a bad thing?
I think sometimes it's bad, because there's a way, you walk into a movie theater and you want to kind of forget about the world around you for a while and live in this crazy land with, Vikings drinking each other's snot in the morning. I can speak from experience. My Norwegian relatives do not drink snot. That is a complete fabrication.
Well, let's talk about this movie coming out and the first time each of us saw it and the impact it had on us. You know what, Kevin, I want to go with you because I know this movie had a big impact on Lee, but I want to we'll start with you on this.
Yeah, I remember seeing this. It was if I remember correctly, it was it's August of 1999. This was the summer of Star Wars as well, when which actually we have an anniversary coming on, 20 years since Phantom Menace, and I was on the road promoting that game with the game company I was working for, and I remember seeing the trailer for this film, and Antonio Banderas obviously was a big draw, and I liked the idea of swords, and I didn't know if it was going to be swords and sorcery or whatever that it was, but the trailers were selling me, and I saw it with a group of people, and we all liked it. I may have saw it more than once too, and then eventually a while later I picked it up on DVD. But I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I still this day. But I had no idea about any of the problems and the reshoots and the delay in this film at all. It wasn't until years and years later I finally remembered that or I learned about that.
Now, Lee, I know this movie had a huge impact on you.
Yeah, it really did. This actually came out after like my first big trip to Norway. And when I got to Norway, I had some of the Norwegian that I learned from my grandpa as a kid, and then forgot quite a bit of it. And then it all sort of came back literally by listening. And it was that scene always comes up because I have friends that will be around me and I'll be speaking several languages. And the scenes the language scenes in this are so familiar to me, like from my own life. And it's really weird to see that actually working in a movie. I will say though, that you can't speak Greek and Latin, one person speaking Greek and the other person speaking Latin, and actually understand each other. They're very different languages. But that was still kind of cool to see. But growing up, my grandfather was president of the Sons of Norway. We just had this Viking heritage and Viking culture thing was very important to us. And to see something kind of awesome on the screen, I saw this opening weekend with my dad. We both flipped out over it. We probably saw it 3 or 4 times in the theater. I dragged my friends to it. And I've never shown this to somebody that didn't like it. It is a niche film, but this should never have been a summer movie. This should have been either February, March, or August, September, because it's never going to attract a huge audience. It's never going to do Phantom Menace numbers. It's never going to do Avengers numbers. But it, could be one of those kind of sleeper mid-season hits. And I just, even watching it, you see some kind of great character actors. Diane Venora has always been a favorite of mine. Every time she's in a movie, I'm like, oh, hey, I'll see her in, she played a Persian in NCIS. She played a Russian agent in The Jackal, which had come out around the same time. Always great.
The Bruce Willis film, right?
Yep. And one of the only good performances from Richard Gere, in my opinion. But yeah, this one, as soon as it came out on DVD, that was one of those Tuesday buys. It's like, okay, I was keeping that in there. And I've made people watch this over and over. And it never gets old. It's always fun. Even the bad parts. I really, really do enjoy this one.
Yeah, I caught this movie. I didn't actually see this movie until DVD release because it didn't stay in the theater where I was at the time that long. And that's because, unfortunately, this movie debuted against another Bruce Willis film, The Sixth Sense. And it just kind of got lost a little bit in the shuffle with everybody talking about The Sixth Sense. But I remember when I did get to see this, I loved this movie. This movie was great. I loved the energy of it. I loved Antonio Banderas in this. I loved the Vikings. I thought it was a great story. I thought it was well executed, and it's one of those movies that you can watch and you just get lost in it, and all of a sudden you kind of blink and it's like, it's over already. What happened? And it's that kind of movie because it just draws you in with what's going on, and you're so invested into the characters of this film and the storyline that's going on that I think that's what makes this movie stand out for me. And I just remember seeing it and just going, wow, I think I literally turned around and rewatched it as soon as I finished it, watching it for the first time. So But let's talk about some of our favorite scenes of this movie. Lee, I want to get your first. What were some of your favorite standout scenes of this film?
Well, the one that we kind of started off with, the listening to language around the fire, that one just always gets me. And it has bugged my family that I can do that, but that is a real thing. Like, my sister went to school in Norway for a year, went to visit her over Christmas, and she had been kind of having a problem learning the language, and she got very mad at me for being able to speak again after having not spoken it for probably 2 years. Just sit there and listen, and the logic of how it came about was wonderful. And it sets up an antagonistic friendship with these guys. Because, I mean, the first thing he doesn't play like Little Lord Fauntleroy. He's like, you guys are being mean to me. I'm going home. No, he's talks some smack back to him. And I think when you get a bunch of alpha guys, and they're all giving each other crap too. I mean, you listening to him, I will have no supper when I come home tonight. Like they're just making fun of the guy, and I don't sound like that. It really sets the stage for a better movie than it could have been. Because, I mean, they set up with Ahmad ibn Fadlan being a womanizer. And so he could have gone and had his romantic conquest in Norway or Sweden or wherever they happen to be. And that could have been the core of the movie. But really, it is the core of like him coming to respect these guys that are, barbaric. We're Norwegians. We have our ways. But building that, I really do love kind of the chase into the caves.
Yeah.
Rewatching that, I forgot how tense that is. I mean, you really hold your breath through half of that. Like, you don't want to make any noise in your living room so that none of the Eaters of the Dead will notice. And that's just really well shot. And I just love the scene in the hall because that's a very Norwegian kind of thing. Even now in small homes, we still kind of have this thing. We hold court, the notion of a guest, very, very important kind of in society. So there are just little things in this that are familiar to my life more than anything. So I love that. And of course, anytime, you get a sword out, and I'm sorry, but when they start chanting, "Lo, there do I see my father. Lo, there do I see my mother and my brothers," at the end, just that's a thing. Like they're all saying their own funeral dirge, and that's cool. That one always makes me happy.
Kevin, what about you? Any standout scenes for you?
I got three, and I want to touch, and Lee kind of touched on two of them, but I want to expand on the first one, the language barrier thing, because what I love about this film, and it was something I don't ever remember seeing in film before, where you had Omar Sharif and Antonio Banderas, but you had Omar Sharif's character translating everything. You didn't get subtitles of the men speaking their language. And I thought that was really, really cool. So you had no idea what exactly they were saying. You had to take Omar Sharif's character's word that he was translating correctly. And I loved how that carried on to when Antonio Banderas then eventually comes to the famous scene where he's listening to them. And I love that scene too, because the first like 30 minutes of this film is so entirely watchable for all these reasons. But I love how he's listening to them and looking at their lips, and you hear them saying words, but then all of a sudden an English word will pop in there, and then they're starting to make a little more sense, and you're understanding this is what he's learning and he's translating from them. And then eventually they all go to English, which is great. Just the little scenes of them teasing him with his small horse and all that kind of stuff. As you mentioned as well, Lee, I love it when they go into the Eaters of the Dead lair, basically, and they come across that room and there's all those bones and skulls everywhere. But the scene that I really, really like is when they're all laying in the hall pretending to sleep, and they're all even snoring to sell it. And at first, Antonio Banderas' character doesn't realize that they're all not sleeping. And he kind of wakes up, I think, from a nightmare or something. And then they start hearing the creaking of the Eaters of the Dead slowly like coming around the room. That is very, very suspenseful. And I love that.
Yeah, for me, I mean, there's a lot of great scenes in this film, but there's a few that I really like that stand out because I think they highlight a couple of the characters in ways that you don't expect to see them. And the first one is shortly after Antonio Banderas even learns the language of the Vikings, he's talking to Bilva, and Bilva talks about drawing sounds. And you have him writing about God and Muhammad, but then that comes back to play when they reach land after traveling across the ocean, and Bilva has him write it again when they reach land. Mm-hmm. And I just think that's such a great moment because I really think that's where you start to see there's more to Bilva than just being, oh, I'm the Viking warrior leader. And you really see just how intelligent he is and how his mind works. And I think that was a great standout moment. One of my other favorite moments is in one of the battles when after Antonio Banderas has changed his sword and he kills one of the Eaters of the Dead and he realizes it's just a man. Mm-hmm. And he just keeps saying it over and over as he takes out one Eater of the Dead after the other. It's just a man. It's just a man. Like the fear is just gone from him now. And he's accepted everything, and it's I think it's such an incredibly powerful scene. And then I think my third favorite scene is going to involve our good friend Herger the Joyous when they kind of instigate a fight. Mm-hmm. And at the end of it, he beheads his opponent, and Antonio Banderas is like, you could have done that at any time. But then they explain to you about the deception and everything with the meaning behind that. And it just shows you there's so much more to the Vikings than what they portrayed at the beginning of the film. And I think I love how it builds that, and it shows them that there's so much more to these Vikings. So I think it's those subtle scenes in this film that really help it stand out as well. Now, guys, there's some great quotes in this film. Do either of you have any favorites, Kevin?
I'd actually like to read that part that you just talked about. It's a great quote between Herger the Joyous and Eben, where Eben says, "You could have killed him at will," and he says, "Yes. Well, why the deception?" And he goes, "Deception is the point. Any fool can calculate strength. That one has been doing it since we arrived. Now he has to calculate what he can't see." And Eben says, "And fear, what he doesn't know." And then Beowulf says, "As you say, foolish and expensive. We will miss Angus tonight. We will miss his sword." But I love that. I love that whole quote, though.
Yeah, no, it's a great quote, and like I said, I really love how it kind of establishes there's so much more to them than meets the eye.
I've got one more too. Okay. I've got one more. And the scene that I spoke of, it says, "When they come, we form a circle in the center of the room, backs to one another." And Eben says, "I am not a warrior." And Herger says, "Very well, very soon you will be."
What about you, Lee? Any favorite quotes from this film?
I really do like when "Go and die in a hold if you like. The All-Father has woven the skein of your story since the day you were born. Fear profits a man nothing." It's just this great kind of stoic fatalism, and it really is. It's still kind of part of that Norwegian lifestyle. So, like, you just sort of whatever's going to happen is going to happen. I've noticed my family and myself doing it quite a bit. Love that one. I do love the Ahmed's little prayer. "Merciful Father, I've squandered my days with plans of many things. This was not among them, but at this moment, I beg only to live for the next few minutes well. For all we ought to have thought and have not thought, all we ought to have said, have not said, all we ought to have done and have not done. I pray thee, God, for forgiveness." Now, I'm an atheist, but that's a powerful, pretty powerful prayer. And of course, the "I cannot lift this, grow stronger." I actually teach with a lot of my students. I will, if they're smaller people, I'll actually give them heavy weapons instead of letting them play with daggers. And the lesson is to grow stronger. And that one, I will admit freely that I have stolen that lesson from this movie.
One of my favorite quotes in this film is still Eben, "Have we anything resembling a plan?" And Herger the Joyous, "Ride till we find them and kill them all."
Classic.
Now, as we talked about, this movie was it was a kind of a co-director thing between John McTiernan and Michael Crichton. It was based off the Michael Crichton novel Eaters of the Dead, with a little help on the screenplay from William Wisher and Warren Lewis. Had any of you guys read the book before the film came out, or was?
Oh, I did not.
Lee. So okay, let me ask you, because I read the story after the film had come out, but how did you feel that the movie translate? Since you had read it already, when the first time you see the movie, how do you feel it translated the story that Michael Crichton wrote?
To me, it got the feeling of it. You know, I mean, there's only so much that you can take from a book and put into a movie. I mean, look at how big the Lord of the Rings is, and there's still tons of stuff that's taken out. But I think the stuff that was taken out was judicious. There's, still plenty of stuff that I would have liked to have seen, but and they changed the way some of the people died, all that stuff. But the book began as a dare, because somebody said that Beowulf was boring and like you can't make that story interesting, and he basically rewrote Beowulf as an interesting story, and keeps to pretty much the idea. But I enjoyed it. I had no complaints walking out.
Yeah, I think they did a fairly good job. Even reading it afterwards, I thought they definitely captured the spirit that Crichton had in the book. So I found that kind of interesting. But Kevin, one of the things I do find very interesting is, and I had actually forgotten about this until you brought up the notes, that Ahmad ibn Fadlan was a real person.
Yeah, he's based on a real character, a real person, born in 1879 in Baghdad. And he was a 10th century Arab Muslim traveler, famous for his accounts of his travels as a member of an embassy of Asib Caliph of Baghdad to the king of the Volga Bulgars, known as his Risala, account for journal. His account is most notable for providing a detailed description of the Volga Vikings, including an eyewitness account of a ship burial. This guy was a real guy, and his and Antonio Banderas' character is based on this character. So
I found that nice touch of history in there. A little bit more about him. Primary source documents and historical texts reveal that Ahmad ibn Fadlan was what is that word, Lee? You're good at this.
It's a faqih.
Faqih, an expert in Islamic jurisprudence and faith in the court of Abbasid Caliph
al-Muqtadir.
He just gets all the hard names from here on out, Kevin. It appears certain from his writings that prior to his departure on his historic mission, he had already been serving for some time in the court of Lee
al-Muqtadir.
He says it with panache too. I just gotta say,
I know he does. Yeah. Just let him.
Yeah. Other than the fact he was born a traveler and the theologian in service of the
Abbasid Caliphate.
Little is known about Ahmad ibn Fadlan prior to 1921 and his self-reported travels. And see, we've got this figured out going forward now, Kevin. We're good.
I do think it's cool in this instance that they went, because you can kind of take Vikings from wherever, and most of the history says that the Vikings come from Scandinavia, but Russia is originally a Viking colony. And in fact, Russia comes from a Norwegian word, but it's going up river like that. The Volga Vikings, like the most Vikings actually did more trade and conquest by river than by sea. They just went, they didn't show up on the shore. They would actually go up river, and their boats, basically the way the keels were constructed, made it so that you could take a ocean going vessel and then go up river, to a draft of, like 3 feet. So, I mean, that was like the armor personnel carrier. I mean, there was nothing like this again for hundreds of years. So I think that's a cool detail that they kept in there. And it's amazing that they got that right. And not a single weapon or piece of armor actually comes from the Viking Age, except for a couple of the swords. Like everything else is like late medieval period. But I'm a nerd about that sort of thing.
Yeah. Now, what's interesting is at the time, this is a pretty much unknown cast, except for really a couple of people. Obviously, Antonio Banderas was huge at this point. Everybody knew who he was. I thought he was brilliant in this film. I thought he did a phenomenal job in this film. And of course, who does not recognize Omar Sharif, the legend? And even in his brief opening in the beginning of this film. But there are a few familiar faces as you go along. Tony Curran is in this film, and if you're not quite recognizing who Tony Curran is, if you're a Doctor Who fan, you know who he is because, there's a certain episode of Doctor Who that he was in that he played a certain artist that is much beloved. He was also in the show Defiance as kind of the main heavy in that show. And he's been in a lot of other things. But Lee, I want you to talk about some of the other actors that are in this film.
Well, I kind of had mentioned Diane Venora, just a fantastic actress. She's a character actress that's been around for several decades, and she's one of those that person actresses. You'll just recognize her from somewhere. And I mean, Tony Curran, I could go on and on about how amazing he is. I saw him on, he did a whole bunch of shows where he's playing paramilitary. Blanking on the name of it, but it was a BBC show.
Navy SEALs.
With
David Boreanaz.
Yeah, but I'm talking 15 years ago. He did a thing with Ross Kemp from EastEnders. It was a British show, and he's always kind of played these tough guys. He was even on several episodes of Covert Affairs on USA, but he keeps on popping up a lot of places. Vladimir Kulich, who played Bolvi. Just a fantastic guy there. He was in Smokin' Aces, one of my absolute favorite, just kind of guilty pleasure movies. He was, I believe he was also in Troy. He was one of the big Trojans or the big Greeks. But you get into, there's just a small, pretty much cameo. The other guy trying to be king when they get to the tent is Fennelly Thorson, who keeps on coming up in a lot of our shows lately. But he was in Mallrats. He was in the first Conan the Barbarian movie. You just see him everywhere. He was in Captain Power. He played one of the bad guys. But, just a great one. And sorry, I'm trying to find the actual Dennis Storhoy, Sorgo the Joyous. As good as Banderas is, that movie does not work without his character, because it gives it joy. It gives it a link between the two lands, and if he didn't, adopt him as a little brother, we have a very different movie of this guy just being annoyed by a whole bunch of Norwegians. And this is I think that's probably the standout performance in this. Just fantastic movie.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you as far as Esther Hori, he's my favorite character in the movie. I love the relationship between him and Antonio Banderas in this film. As he calls him little brother at first, kind of as maybe a little having a little fun with him, but it becomes a term of respect. And just the relationship between those two was so outstanding. Kevin, what about you? What about the cast stood out for you?
I remember Antonio Banderas and Omar Sharif were the only names that I remembered and that I recognized for years to come after that. But I agree with you guys, especially what you said, Lee, about Dennis as Herger the Joyous. When I was rewatching this film just recently, and I'm looking at it going, he's almost like the real star of this film. Antonio Banderas, I know, is the lead in this. And Kyle, you made a point. You really, this film isn't the same without him, and he steals every scene that he's in. And to me, he's actually he seems like he's the leader. Even though Vladimir, who plays how do you say his name again?
Bulva,
he is the leader. Even though he is the leader, Herger's the guy that seems to really kind of have the counsel and really kind of sees the big picture. And he's also freaking hilarious in this film and just steals every scene that he's in.
This was one of the frustrations things I had about this film, though, was you really don't catch a lot of the characters' names in this movie.
Mm-hmm.
And so you just become they all become that guy. Except for Bolvi and Eben, but everybody else you only catch their name maybe once if you're lucky.
Yeah.
And so I think that was kind of, sometimes that's a good, it works. Sometimes it's a little frustrating. I think for me, as you move later on and to see this film multiple times and you really want to know more about the characters, not catching their name for a good while before the internet really evolved and you could actually go look it up, kind of was one of the frustrations of this film.
I just realized something. Herger is basically the two of these guys, Herger and Ibn. It's almost like Jack Burton and his buddy from San Francisco, because he's like that link into that world. He's the weird traveling foreigner that gets sucked into this chaotic thing, trying to figure it out the whole way through. And you've got him explaining like all the weirdness in his life, and sort of the same thing. Like Banderas is around for the ride, but he's the star, just like Jack Burton is sort of there. But another one of my favorite movies. Sorry about that. Speaking of segues.
So let's talk about this film. It had a runtime of 1 hour and 42 minutes. It released on August 27th, 1999 with a motion picture rating of R at an estimated budget of $160 million, which we talked about earlier in the show because of reshoots. Opening weekend gross was $10 million to a little over 250,000 on August 29th, 1999. The gross in the U.S. was a little over 32 million. The worldwide gross was 61.7 million. So this movie basically lost almost $100 million. Touchstone Picture was their distributors, as well as New Films International for all the non-U.S. Now, we talked a little bit about it earlier. Originally titled Eaters of the Dead, production began in the summer of 97, but the film went through several re-edits after some test audiences did not act well to the initial cut. I still would like to see that initial cut. I think it's never been put out, but I would be curious about that. Crichton took over as the director because of this, causing the release date to be pushed back over a year. The film was recut, adding a new ending, as well as adding a all-new score. Graham Revell was replaced by Jerry Goldsmith as the composer, and the title was changed to The 13th Warrior. The budget, which was originally around $85 million, reportedly soared to $100 million before principal photography wrapped. With all the reshoots and promotional expenses, the total cost of the film was rumored to be as high as $160 million, which, given its lackluster box office take of $61.7 million, made for an estimated loss of $70 to $130 million, making one of the biggest box office bombs in history and the biggest one of 1999, with losses up to $129 million. Yeah, I don't think all of that was a write-off for the studio, Kevin.
Yeah, no. And it's funny about what I find interesting was when it was recut and the new ending, along with a new score, which I thought was weird because Graham Revell was replaced by Jerry Goldsmith, and I first remember hearing of Graham Revell because he did he was the composer for the Crow soundtrack. Mm-hmm. You know, although that soundtrack is more known for, the bands and stuff that were on there, but the actual music behind it was done by Graham Revell. So that's interesting.
Now, so my question is, Lee, you think this gets that kind of money because of Michael Crichton? Because at that point, Michael Crichton could do no wrong?
It does, but it's also a movie. I'm looking at it and I can't really tell where they spent it. Because, I mean, the sets are...
Are you talking about the reshoots?
Anywhere. The sets and costumes are pretty awesome, but that's the kind of thing that doesn't take a huge budget. Like, I don't, yes, Banderas is a big name, but, the second biggest name is Omar Sharif, who is in the twilight of his career at this point, who's not a box office draw for anybody under 40. While both great performances, there's nobody else to act off of. It's not necessarily a popular genre at the time. We had Braveheart a few years ago before this, but we weren't really doing a lot of sword movies. And while the sets are amazing, absolutely beautiful, the props, I'm looking at them and most of them are like the sort of stuff you can get in a mall. What's his name? The bearded dude's axe was like this $15 thing that you could get at pretty much any kind of Chinese gift shop. I used to see him at this place called Canton in Iowa. And I just don't see where the money went because like there's not a big special effects budget. And I'm sorry, the boat scene does not hold up.
It's interesting you say that because this was all filmed in Vancouver. And during this time, a lot of productions were going up to Vancouver because you had one of the biggest shows at the time, X-Files, And you had Stargate and all these other shows going out there because it was supposed to be cheaper to film in Vancouver. And Highlander, the TV series, half of it was filmed in there as well.
I think Smallville was actually filming there as well, too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I find that interesting as well. But, I can trying to go into, because if you go to Vancouver, a lot of these shows will go back up into the hills and the mountains because they double for a lot of other locations around the world. That's what makes Vancouver another reason a great place to shoot. But I think a lot of the cost on this had to do with the reshoots because they stopped, they finished filming in 97. They didn't release it until 99, 2 years later. So I'm assuming that a lot of these costs have to do with reshoots because reshoots are, if you don't plan for them, and having to go back and then pull actors away from other projects to go back and refilm scenes of a movie they thought they finished a while ago. That's why nowadays a lot of these big budget films, specifically ones that Disney or a lot of these other films will do, that they'll actually schedule a time for reshoots if it's needed, maybe months later. And that is into the contract of the actors when they sign it, saying, yeah, we're going to shoot between September and January, but we may have you back, next May or June to do some reshoots.
I actually just signed one of those contracts.
So I can,
they gave us 4 possible shoot weeks for the stuff that I'm going to be filming. And then they're like, and then reshoot dates in September, and also with like kind of an understanding that this is going to be fluid because of everything with COVID. But the ability to reshoot is very important because you're basically juggling squirrels making a movie, and it's even less organized than it sounds. And you might just need to go in for one close up on somebody. And I think the best reshoot that was ever done was in Casablanca. There's a scene where the Germans and the French are kind of singing their national anthems at each other. And it wasn't working. Like, it was still very well acted. But there's a moment where they brought Bogart back. He had actually been offset for a long time. They brought him back on. And they just filmed him looking down at the band and just nodding. And then they filmed Louis Armstrong separately looking up. They weren't even in the same room. And then Bogey went and got drunk. And that's why they call the last shot in a movie the martini shot. So that's a little bit of a inside trivia for you.
That's cool. With this film, though, it's a lot of reshoots will be done with like a second unit director, not the main director, because the main director might be helping or being in there with editing and stuff. And so, but in this case, they had to reshoot a whole new ending for this. Obviously, whatever the original ending was did not do well in test screening. So I assume they almost had to kind of recreate some sets that may have been taken down, a year or so later or before. So I'm assuming, like I said, it had to do a lot with the reshoots, I bet you. And the marketing
also completely rescoring the film.
Yeah, it makes you wonder how mismatched it was.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about some of the critical responses to this 13th Warrior. The film debuted at number 2 on its opening weekend behind The Sixth Sense, which was blowing everything out of the water that point. The 13th Warrior holds a 33% approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes, Kevin's favorite site. Based on 88 reviews, the consensus is atmospheric, great sets and costumes, but thin plot. I didn't watch this movie to have a deep plot. That's not what this movie is about. And I think the plot is solid.
Yeah,
in this.
Better than you should expect from an action movie.
Kevin, our good friend Roger Ebert, gave the film 1.5 stars out of 4, remarking that it lumbered from one expensive set piece to the next without taking time to tell a story that might make us care. Conversely, James Bertinelli gave the 13th Warrior 3 stars out of 4, calling it a solid offering that delivers an exhilarating 100 minutes. He knew what he was watching.
I will say I read the whole Roger Ebert thing, and I'm usually kind of on the page with him. He just really ripped this one apart. And he made a couple comments. It's like, they said of Antonio Banderas as being this cultured and educated person, and he just did not understand why Banderas could come to respect the Vikings by the end of the movie. And like, I think at that point, I mean, he's always been a little bit elitist. Most critics are. But I think at that point he had gotten so elitist that he couldn't have a character that starts off that educated and formal having any sort of respect for anything less than, exquisite. So I that's probably like my least favorite Roger Ebert review I've ever read.
Yeah, because I think that's actually a big key point in the movie is how they find a mutual respect for each other.
Mm-hmm.
So Alicia Schwartzbaum of Entertainment Weekly, I love what she said. Rated it an A- and called it the most unexpectedly audacious, exhilarating, and wildly creative adventure thriller I have seen in ages. So, but here's the one. This kind of hurts a little bit, but the outcome of the film's production disappointed Omar Sharif so much that he temporarily retired from film acting, not taking a role in another major film until 2003's Monsieur Ibrahim. After the small role in The 13th Warrior, I said to myself, let us stop this nonsense. These meal tickets that we do because it pays well. I thought, unless I find a stupendous film that I love and that makes me want to leave home to do, I will stop. Bad pictures are very humiliating. I was really sick. It is terrifying to have to do the dialogue from bad scripts to face a director who does not know what he is doing in a film so bad that it's not even worth exploring. That's some pretty powerful words from a legendary actor.
See, I liked his performance in this. I thought it brought a certain gravity to it. I don't think that he was ill-used. And I will say, just everyone should watch Monsieur Ibrahim. It is a beautifully done movie. It's in French. You can see it in subtitles, but it's subtle and it's sad and it's sweet. And he's just this amazing guy. And having seen both movies, I understand why Omar Sharif would prefer to do the other, because he is much better in that. But it's still, I would not say that this was a bad movie. I wouldn't say that his performance was in any way less than stellar either. But
I like you said, Lee, I liked his performance in this. My only criticism is I would have loved to have seen more. Like, it would have been great if we saw him towards the end, maybe, or something, or if he had either accompanied them a little bit further in the film, because, I love the screen presence that he has. And I have a feeling maybe it has to do with the bad box office reviews and maybe the bad reviews of the film, he took personally, maybe. I don't know, but it's hard for me to put myself in his shoes, but I would have loved to have had a role like that in a film like that, But I of course, I'm not on set, and obviously he had something to say about John McTiernan in this, and maybe he wasn't happy with the way that he was running the show.
And I've been on really bad sets before, and I've actually had horrible sets and horrible directors where my performance and the screen time I got was amazing. So there is probably something behind the scenes that didn't work, but the guy that made Die Hard probably knows what he's doing.
You would think, but let's talk about video releases, special editions, and alternate versions, or as I like to call it, the Kevin M. Reitzel category. The original version, known as Eaters of the Dead and directed by John McTiernan, was originally 127 minutes and slated to be released in May of 1998. When the film failed test screenings, Michael Crichton took over the project and reshot and added new material to the film. He was also involved with the re-editing of the film, as well as and rejected composer Graham Revell's hour-long score. That's a long score. This version of the film has never been seen publicly. Would you guys want to see this?
Yes.
So yeah, this film now is at an hour and 40 minutes. And so the original one was about almost a half an hour longer. And apparently they reshot new scenes, which means they cut out a lot of stuff, apparently. That's really weird. I would love to see the original, I guess, director's cut, as you would call it, because I'm really curious what the ending was. Did we have Eben dying, maybe? I don't know, but I'm fascinated to find that out.
One of the things about the musical soundtrack, too, was apparently the Graham Revell score featured the Dead Can Dance singer Lisa Gerrard. So I'm assuming there was some music with vocals in this film as well in the original cut. So I found that interesting. We talked about it earlier. This film is in a beautiful location in Vancouver, British Columbia. Just absolutely gorgeous country, and fits perfectly for what this film was doing. Interesting filming dates. 26th of June, 1997 to 1st of November, 1997, and then basically all through 1998. So, thank you, reshoots. But we're going to take a quick break here, go sharpen our swords. I maybe make Kevin's a little lighter for him so he can do some really cool twirlies and action with it. But while we're doing that, here's a little bit of what else is going on around the Fandom Podcast Network.
Thank you for listening. We hope you're enjoying this podcast. We'd like to continue to feed your ears by inviting you to listen to our other awesome shows on the Fandom Podcast Network. It starts with our flagship show, Culture Clash, our weekly pop culture podcast. For you movie fans, we have Couch Potato Theater, where we celebrate our favorite cult classic and guilty pleasure movies. We also have Time Warp. That's our Fandom Flashback show, where we like to look back on our favorite fandoms. For you NFL fans, we have the End Zone podcast. And of course, for you Alfred Hitchcock fans, please check out Good Evening. For you Star Trek and Orville fans, we also have the Union Federation podcast. And for you hard rock metal fans, we have Hair Metal, the 1980s rock metal podcast. Doctor Who fans, we've got one for you as well. We have Type 40, our Doctor Who podcast. If you're a fan of 1980s action films, please check out Lethal Mullet. And our newest show, we have a Star Wars podcast called What a Piece of Junk. You can enjoy all of these great Fandom Podcast Network shows on our master feed at fpnet.podbean.com. The FPNet can also be found on the Podbean app. The Fandom Podcast Network can also be found on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Google Play, and Spotify. Please search on Facebook for Fandom Podcast Network. You can also email us at fandompodcastnetwork@gmail.com. We are also on Instagram and Twitter under Fandom Podcast Network. Thank you for listening, and remember, respect others and enjoy your fandom.
Well, we hope you're enjoying the podcast we put out as we try to feed your ears with podcasts that hopefully you enjoy and put a smile on your face, especially in current times. But let's talk a little trivia. Kevin, you want to help me out here with some of the trivia? Because we got a lot of interesting trivia for the 13th Warrior.
The idea of the 13 Warriors is taken from the Scandinavian myths regarding the Danish king Rolf Kraki. I butchered that.
Well, you're pretty close. It's Rolf Kraki.
Yes. In parentheses, it says pole ladder. The legend goes that Kraki had an entourage of 12 warriors, like
Bolvi.
Say it. I keep Bolvi in the film. And in some versions, one of them is Bajarki, a hero who shares parallels with the hero Beowulf. Some scholars have suggested that the story is simply another version of the story of Beowulf.
In accordance with the book, John McTiernan's version of the Wendell's mother was an old woman, played by veteran actress Susan Willis. When Michael Crichton took over and did the research, he decided that brutally killing off an old lady did not reflect very well on the heroes. Crichton decided to make her younger, sleeker, and tougher. In the final release, Wendell's mother is played by Kristen Cloak, uncredited, but the final credit is still lists Susan Willis as the Wendell's mother. Very interesting there. Another interesting thing, the film never explains who the mist monsters actually are. In the novel, they were the descendants of the Neanderthals.
By the way, real quick, Kristen Cloak reminded me. Do you know who she is, Kyle?
No.
She was Lieutenant Shane Vanson in Space Above and Beyond. Yes. And she was also in Millennium, played Laura Means, Final Destination. But yeah, she's kind of like that girl. But yeah.
Now, I might have to go check this out because one of the Viking ships used in the movie is now in the Norwegian Pavilion in the Epcot Center at Walt Disney World, where it is used as a playground for kids. Disney owns Touchstone Pictures. I have to go check this out.
It has been removed, unfortunately.
Has been?
Yeah, they did a bunch of stuff that was really dumb. They took out the Norway ride and turned it into a Frozen ride.
Well, that I knew. That part I knew. So,
but and they're bringing in more stuff, but Epcot should be about learning, and Magic Kingdom should be about all the properties. But it was really cool to see, and it's pretty enormous.
Yeah, I like this. This is kind of scary when you think about it. Herger, Dennis Storhoy, almost drowned under the underwater section. Antonio Banderas jumped into the water and pulled him out of the water and saved his life. That was a long scene that they were underwater in the filming.
Well, something similar almost happened on Lord of the Rings when they did the Aragorn in the river in the Two Towers. He actually almost went over the falls or something there.
Yeah. One other thing, because I want to talk about this for a few minutes. In John McTiernan's original cut, there was no final duel between Bolvi and the leader of the Wendell. Now, Kevin, Lee and I were kind of talking about this off mic, and it was one of the things I noticed because I just finished rewatching the film about 15 minutes before we did this podcast. That final battle between those two actually was very anticlimactic. What did you think?
It was, but well, it depends on how you look at it, because when they're in the caves and he kills the leader, the woman played by Kristen Cloak, that then they have to kind of go back and now, you didn't kill her main warrior. So now they're going to come back and try and kill us. And so now they're trying to, get ready for the attack, and it happens. And yeah, it probably wasn't the best fight, but what I found more questionable was, and it happened earlier in the film, was that you hear the horns, as I'm going to call the horns of retreat, where they hear these horns and then all of a sudden, okay, we're going to stop and then run away. That's the thing that I find more questioning.
How so? Because I mean, to me, with the nature of the mist monsters, or as well, these descendants from the Neanderthals, you lose your leader. That kind of, in this case, especially as considering how powerful the image of the leader is and the confusion it causes, to me, a fear of losing this symbol of power would be something to make somebody want to retreat.
Yeah, it just seemed like they were outnumbered. It seemed like there were so many of the eaters of the dead that were there. But I know that, in certain cultures, when you lose the head of the snake, it's crippling. And so I could see why. But it could have been better. But I think the big climactic scene, though, was more in the caves of the eaters of the dead and facing this queen type woman.
Now, Lee, when we talked about this too, and we both agree on this, one of the greatest death moments in a film.
Oh yeah. He wins the fight, and then he just goes and he sits down on his throne like King Conan. He's got that awesome sword of his, and it's, nobody picks their way out.
He dies because of the poison.
He basically is fighting the poison as he's fighting everybody else. It's like, okay, I've got minutes left. I got to do this right. But just such a cool death. Like if you could choose your way to go out, that would be pretty cool. Slaughtering your enemy and then sitting majestically on a throne of battle.
Yeah. Now, what?
Can I get a question with one of the trivia things
absolutely.
in here? And I want to ask you, Lee. Yeah, I want to ask Lee something because you read the book. It says the film never explains who the mist monsters actually are, but in the novel they were descendants of Neanderthals. Can you go into that a little bit more and explain how the book went about explaining that?
They described them as you would describe Neanderthals, with the slightly sloped foreheads, a little bit higher brow ridge. And then I think it was actually in the epilogue because they've really made the book seem like it was historical. Like they did a lot of, like from the journal of instead of chapter 3. And so in the epilogue, they really basically sold it like Michael Crichton does with all his stuff, like with the pseudo-scientific or pseudo-archaeological evidence of it. And so they kind of brought that through in the end. It was never a plot point for any of the Vikings. It's like, oh, here's this word we've never come across. And, but they were kind of cavemen, troglodytes, and they sort of alluded to it a little bit with the use of the smaller idols. That's more of a primitive society type of, I don't know what you would call that, talisman artifact. And you see it through most cultures will have kind of that mother god.
Because the thing that I really find fascinating about this film, and it still creates tension for me when I watch it, is the building up of this horrible threat. And then we get teased to it when they go to that, where they find all those bodies that are dead, and there's the Eaters of the Dead scout that's slowly watching them in the shadows. And and they talk about how there's this fire worm or the dragon that comes down from the mountain, and you see that when they're all have the fire and they're all coming down, but then they know they're going to attack because they like to attack in the mist and stuff like that. I just love how they built all of that up.
Yeah, no, I thought that was really cool. I think the quote unquote fireworm dragon shot was one of the cooler shots in the film as well. But let's talk about, there really wasn't any merchandise or sequels because, this movie.
I do have a little bit of merchandise.
Uh-oh.
I should not have spent this amount of money, but I do have a, shall we say, better than movie version of Bilva's sword. It is a twist Damascus pattern. At the time it was made, it was the longest Damascus blade ever made. It was made by John Landino, who did the swords for Conan the Barbarian. My buddies at Arms and Armor did the pommel guard and handle. It is a gorgeous piece of weaponry. And if the zombie apocalypse happens, just listen for giggling and you will find me with that sword.
You're right, Kyle. There is no toys or anything, but when it comes to video releases, there really isn't much to jump for. I mean, I tried finding, I had the DVD for the longest time, and I tried finding an American release on Blu-ray, and it hasn't come out yet. So I had to go to Germany to pick up my Blu-ray.
That's why it's in Sega.
I still kept the. Yeah, I still kept the original DVD itself. I slid it in the Blu-ray case, but this movie really hasn't received much love when it comes to 20th anniversary editions, 10th anniversary editions. Even, I mean, we got nothing with this film. I am kind of curious though, if there was a sequel, if this movie had made money, where would the sequel have taken us?
I think it follows Antonio Banderas' character. And maybe a different adventure, maybe using that character in some of his real life things to create another film. If you were going to go that route,
I mean, if he went back to,
I want him to meet up with Herger again.
Well, there's because he did end up in Byzantium for a while, which they had a corps of Viking mercenary guards for the emperor called the Varangians, and so you could have had this amazing set in Byzantium or Constantinople, and you could have brought all these just kind of the rich beauty of that world. Because it is this confluence of so many different cultures. You've got Christian, Arabic, Russian, Baltic states. It's there on the Mediterranean, but it's also on the Black Sea. That would have been a really cool place to go next, and you could have had some court intrigues, and you could have had some crazy fun.
Yeah. So. Obviously, we don't have merchandise, but let's talk about if they were to do a remake, or would you rather see it as a film, or would you maybe like to see it as a series of some kind, streaming or otherwise? Kevin, start with you on this one.
I could see it done with a television series, but I almost kind of want to see what they would do with a remake, because I'd be curious to see what kind of cast that they could get nowadays. Because it seems like Viking films and TV series are very popular now, so they have a lot to pull from. But if you really want to get into the mythology and maybe the adventure of Eben's character, you probably should do a TV series, and then it finally leads up to him becoming the 13th warrior or something like that. And it would be interesting to see what his life was, especially when he fell for the woman that was already taken, something like that. I don't know.
I agree. I think that this would be a great setting for like a Netflix style short series, maybe 8 episodes, but getting more time establishing even in the Ottoman Empire or the Turkish Empire, wherever he happened to be at the time. I'm blanking on it, but just establishing that world so that the shock of the Viking world could be a little bit more potent. And also just the traveling from where he had been into kind of the Volga Viking area and having a transition. And I think that'd be a pretty cool way to do it. Plus, you spend more time establishing who the Eaters of the Dead are. They can be a bit more terrifying. You can establish the warriors a little bit more than I'm the tall bearded guy. I'm the old bearded guy. I'm the young guy without a beard. They didn't have, I'm the redheaded guy that apparently talks like this in Norway. I think it would be a good series remake. I don't think another movie would do better, but I think a series would. I
agree with both of you. I think a series would be the way to go on this, and maybe even make it call it Eaters of the Dead, or you could either. I think you could go either way on it, but I would like to see them expand on the Eben character and some of give a little bit more detail about some of the other warriors from this group, and I think maybe you go about 10 episodes and you're good to go there. I don't know if we'll ever see it because getting the rights to license a Crichton thing is kind of hard these days because there's several of his books that people have been trying to get the rights to for a while now, and they just don't want to seem to let them go. So it will be interesting to see what could play out there. But as we get ready to close out, first of all, I want to thank both of you guys for being here. Lee, thank you for your proper speaking of Viking names, and
I do what I can.
But I want to give each of you guys a chance to kind of give your final thoughts on the 13th Warrior and what made it so enjoyable for you. Kevin, I want to start with you.
This movie still holds up big time. Visually, I think it does. Storytelling. One of the more interesting villains or groups of villains I've ever seen. And a great introduction into cultural differences and language differences and accepting of those as well. And when you see the character of Eben changing and maturing and becoming a warrior, it's fascinating because you're along that ride. As much as he was ridiculed, he got the respect from the rest of the 12 warriors, and he also came along to respect them. And it's a fascinating look into that type of history and that type of living, that type of threats. And I thoroughly enjoyed it, and it was a lot of fun to rewatch.
Lee, again, I know this was a huge movie for you. Some final thoughts on the 13th Warrior.
It's just fun. This is what movies should be. Is fun. It takes you to a different place. It's a very unusual reason for fighting. Usually there's no real revenge in this. You're kind of protecting from this faceless army. He's not avenging the death of his girlfriend or his wife. He's not even willingly a part of this, but he accepts it, and he kind of becomes a member of this fellowship of warriors. And it's just kind of, as a dude, it sort of kind of speaks to you, puts a little thump in your chest. It's kind of fun. One other thing I will say is don't go and take a sword and try to reshape it. That doesn't work. That is very much a Hollywood thing. You will break your sword. And also, they didn't start making swords that shape until 4 centuries after this movie was made. So, but that's my little nerdy moment. I apologize, everyone.
Your historical lesson today has been brought to you by Lee. Now, here's the thing: the 13th Warrior is a great fun film, and it is a film that defines what couch potato theater is. You get lost in this film, but I do think that there's a lot more little nuances in this film as far as the character development that a lot of people, I don't think, ever got past the initial action of this movie to really take a look at, as far as the character development between Eben and these Vikings and the respect that does grow between them, and realizing that Eben's own impressions of the Vikings as these like almost Neanderthals themselves were totally off base, especially as he gets to know them, whether it's with Bolvi and his request of talking right before he's dead about how he is a wealthy man because there's somebody there to write his story. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a great line in this film. I think this film, if it comes out in a different time period, does phenomenally better than what it did in the box office. And I think this is one of those movies that probably has come closer. I'm not going to say breaking even. It lost a lot of money, but it probably made a nice chunk back in DVD sales over the years. And as far as trying to find this in high definition, it is on iTunes in high definition. You can find it there. And I think it's like on $14.99, $12.99. So it's not an expensive buy on iTunes. either. I think it's also on Amazon Prime, so you can get a high definition version of this if you can't find a Blu-ray, or if you don't have international sources like Kevin Reitzel, international man of movies. But it's a great film. It's everything Couch Potato stands for, because whenever I find this on cable, because usually it's about every year, once a year, maybe once a couple of years, it gets a heavy rotation in cable. And you can usually find it for about a month and a half, where it's one of those movies that it's like, gosh, it seems like this was just on the other night, but yet you still watch it. Yeah. So, everything that Couch Potato is, I think it's a great Antonio Banderas film. I think it's a great film to lose yourself in for a couple hours and be what a movie is supposed to be, just enjoyment and escape. And that's what makes this movie so outstanding. So for my guests, Lee and Kevin, who you can also hear on Blood of Kings here on the Fandom Podcast Network, I want to say thank you. And until next time, we will see you on the couch.